The late summer air over Los Angeles shimmered with that peculiar heat that seemed to distort time itself, a heat that made every word, every glance, every silence feel heavier than it should. At Forrester Creations, the hum of sewing machines, the gleam of silk, and the quiet chaos of design meetings masked what had become an open secret. Daphne Hale, the poised, graceful consultant whose charm disarmed even the sharpest executives, had turned her focus entirely on Carter Walton. To the outside world, she appeared as the embodiment of calm professionalism, a woman who seemed immune to drama, the very definition of elegance. But beneath that flawless composure, jealousy simmered like acid. Carter, for all his kindness and measured warmth, had never fully let go of Hope Logan. It wasn't the kind of obsession that burned visibly. It was quieter, older, hidden under layers of restraint. Yet Daphne saw it. She saw it in the way his voice softened when Hope entered a room, the way his eyes followed her in board meetings when he thought no one was looking. And for Daphne, that small shadow of longing was enough to unravel everything. She had been patient at first, waiting for time to do its work, waiting for the old flames of Hope's tangled life to dim so that Carter might finally see her, not as a colleague, not as a distraction, but as a woman who could stand beside him in every sense. But patience, she discovered, had limits. It wasn't that she doubted Carter's decency. It was that she wanted proof that the man she loved would choose her over the ghost of another woman's light. And when love becomes a test, it stops being love and becomes something colder, sharper, more dangerous. Daphne told herself she wasn't being manipulative, that she was simply creating a situation to reveal the truth. In reality, she was already laying the groundwork for destruction. Her plan began as a whisper of an idea, a dinner, a conversation, a moment that would force Carter to confront his heart. But like all things in their world, it grew into a spectacle. She orchestrated a charity gala at Forrester Creations, claiming it was to honor new partnerships with international designers. In truth, the event was a stage. She invited Hope personally, framing it as an olive branch between professionals. Hope, as kind as she was oblivious, accepted graciously. Carter hesitated, sensing the tension between the two women, but Daphne brushed it off with a smile too serene to question. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in opulence. The Forrester showroom was transformed into a labyrinth of gold and glass, every corner gleaming with light. The city's elite poured in, their laughter mingling with the soft music of a live orchestra. Daphne moved through the crowd like a vision, an ivory gown, hair pinned with understated perfection, a scent that lingered like a promise. She stayed close to Carter all evening, her hand brushing his arm, her laughter timed perfectly to his smiles. To anyone watching, they looked inseparable. Hope arrived later, radiant but unguarded, wearing the kind of quiet confidence that made Daphne's teeth clench behind her smile. Carter's expression when he saw her, an unconscious flicker of warmth and regret, was all Daphne needed to know that her instincts had been right. What she hadn't anticipated was how easy it would be for jealousy to twist her judgment. When she saw Hope laugh with another man, a journalist from Ion Fashion, Daphne's restraint began to crumble. She leaned toward Carter, her voice low. "You still care about her," she said, not as a question, but as an accusation. He blinked, startled, the sincerity in his eyes almost painful. "Hope is a friend," he replied, steady but unconvincing. "A friend who has broken your heart more than once," Daphne murmured. "Do you really want to be her safety net forever?" The conversation might have ended there, but fate had other plans. As the evening wore on, a figure appeared at the entrance, someone none of them expected to see again. Veronica Lang, a journalist known for her ruthless exposés and her uncanny ability to sniff out secrets, glided through the crowd with the calm assurance of a woman holding a loaded weapon. Years ago, Veronica had nearly destroyed Daphne's career with a story that hinted at scandal, but the details had vanished before publication. Now, her reappearance felt like the return of a ghost. She made her way toward Daphne, a glass of champagne in hand, her smile sharp as glass. "It's been a long time," Veronica said softly when she reached her. Still charming your way through the ranks, I see. Daphne's blood turned to ice, but she didn't flinch. Some of us prefer to work, Veronica, she replied evenly. Others just watch. Veronica's smile deepened. And some of us remember. Within an hour, whispers began to spread, quiet, poisonous. Someone had seen Veronica speaking with a photographer near the archives. Someone else claimed she had old emails linking Daphne to an affair years earlier, one involving Carter himself, back when he had been with Zoe. The story, if true, painted Daphne not as the composed professional she appeared to be, but as a woman who had once schemed to seduce Carter while pretending friendship with his lover. The implication was clear. Daphne's return to Forrester hadn't been coincidence. It had been a long, deliberate pursuit. Carter heard fragments of the rumor before the night ended. He found Daphne outside on the terrace, the city glittering behind her like a reflection of her own turmoil. Tell me it's not true, he said quietly. She didn't turn at first. When she did, her expression was unreadable. You think I came back here just to trap you? She asked. I think, he said slowly, you've been trying to prove something to yourself for a long time. Maybe longer than you've been trying to prove anything to me. Her eyes flickered, not with guilt, but with something far more dangerous. Pain. You never let me in, she whispered. You never stopped loving her. Don't make me the villain for wanting to know if I mattered. But the truth Veronica had unearthed went deeper than anyone realized. The old scandal Daphne had buried wasn't just about love or ambition, it was about betrayal. Years earlier, when Carter had been on the verge of marrying Zoe, Daphne had been part of a corporate maneuver that used her charm to influence legal contracts connected to Forrester's expansion. She had been young, desperate, and manipulated by powerful men who saw her as a pawn. The attempt to seduce Carter hadn't been personal then, it had been strategic. But what began as an assignment had become something she couldn't control. She had fallen for him, and when the plan collapsed, she had vanished, carrying the weight of her shame like a scar. Now, that past had returned with teeth. Veronica had proof, and she wasn't bluffing. The next morning, an anonymous blog post appeared detailing Daphne's history, complete with partial correspondence and financial records. The fashion world devoured it. By noon, Daphne's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. Forrester's PR team scrambled to contain the fallout, but the damage was done. Hope, ever the moral center of their chaotic universe, found herself torn between disgust and compassion. She confronted Carter privately, urging him to distance himself from Daphne before the scandal consumed him too. But Carter, always loyal to a fault, refused. She's more than her mistakes, he said quietly. You, of all people, should understand that. Hope left that conversation shaken. For the first time, she saw that Carter's loyalty to Daphne wasn't just affection, it was redemption. He saw in her the same brokenness he had once seen in himself. And that realization unsettled Hope more than she wanted to admit. Meanwhile, Daphne's life began to unravel. Veronica's story gained traction, sponsors withdrew, and whispers turned into open hostility. Still, she refused to disappear again. Instead, she went to Veronica directly. The confrontation took place in a quiet cafe near downtown, an unlikely setting for the storm that followed. You want to ruin me, Daphne said, her voice steady. But you don't even understand what you're exposing. Veronica leaned back, amused. Then enlighten me. Daphne told her everything. The manipulation, the contracts, the men who had used her and then discarded her. When she finished, there was no triumph in her tone, only exhaustion. Veronica studied her for a long time before saying, Then why not tell the truth yourself? Daphne shook her head. Because the truth won't save me. It'll just destroy Carter, too. But by then, the truth no longer belonged to anyone. It had become its own living thing, growing through the cracks of every silence. Hope learned that Veronica was preparing a televised exposé. Ridge warned Carter that keeping Daphne close could drag Forrester into ruin. And Carter, torn between loyalty and fear, found himself drifting toward the one person he had tried hardest to stay away from: hope. Their conversations grew longer, quieter, filled with what they didn't say. Hope tried to remind herself that compassion wasn't love, but the line blurred dangerously each time Carter looked at her with the same softness that once belonged to Daphne. The night of the exposé, Daphne made her choice. Instead of running, she called a press conference of her own. Standing before the cameras, her face pale but composed, she told the world what had happened years ago. Not as an excuse, but as a confession. "I was naive," she said. "I let ambition cloud my judgment. I let others use me. But I won't let them write the rest of my story." Her honesty silenced the room. Even Veronica, watching from the studio, hesitated before releasing her segment. When it aired later that evening, it painted Daphne not as a villain, but as a survivor. The damage was still real, but so was the respect she earned for facing it head-on. Afterward, Carter found her in her office, the city lights flickering through the window. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I did," she replied softly. "Because I couldn't ask you to choose me if I was still hiding." There was a long silence. "I don't know what happens next," he admitted. She smiled faintly. "Maybe we finally stop trying to test love and just let it be." But nothing in their world ever stayed simple for long. Outside, Veronica received an anonymous message containing a new piece of information, proof that the corporate conspiracy Daphne had described was still alive, operating under different names, still using people as pawns. At the center of it was a name neither she nor Daphne expected: Hope Logan. And just like that, the story turned again. Love and truth colliding once more, leaving every heart in Los Angeles trembling on the edge of revelation. The sea had never truly returned her. Even after the accident, after the wreckage was cleared and her body laid to rest, Luna Nozawa remained a ghost that Los Angeles could not stop talking about. For months, her name appeared in headlines like a haunting refrain: the designer who died too young, the muse who burned too bright, the scandal that ended in silence. But the silence never lasted. It had a way of breaking open at the edges, seeping through every conversation at Spencer Publications, every sleepless night in Bill's penthouse, every whispered argument between Will and Electra. Her absence had not ended anything. It had merely begun a new kind of unrest. It started with a letter. No one knew where it came from. One morning, a sealed envelope appeared on the desk of the Spencer Foundation. No return address, no fingerprints. Inside was a birth certificate. The mother's name, Luna Nozawa. The father's, undisclosed. The date matched the final week before the crash that had claimed her life. At first, Bill dismissed it as a hoax. People forged things all the time for money or attention. But the paper felt old, the ink faint, and the signature, her signature, was unmistakable. The realization struck like lightning. Luna had given birth before she died, or perhaps had arranged for the child to be born afterward through one of the private clinics she had invested in during her final months. Either way, the message was clear. She had left behind a legacy that no one had expected, one that bore the blood of the Spencers. The revelation hit the family like a storm. Electra, who had been trying to rebuild her life with Will after months of grief and guilt, was the first to break. "It's impossible," she whispered, staring at the certificate as if it were a curse. But Will said nothing. He recognized the date. He remembered the final night he had seen Luna alive. The argument, the words they had left unsaid, the way she had looked at him with something closer to resignation than anger. Now that memory felt like a wound reopening. "She knew," he murmured. "She knew I wouldn't be able to walk away if I knew about the baby." Bill Spencer, who had weathered more scandals than most men survived in a lifetime, felt something unfamiliar creeping into his chest. Fear. Not of the media, not of the legal battles that would follow, but of history repeating itself. He had fought to keep his empire untarnished by family mistakes, by secrets born of passion and recklessness. But the sins of the past had a way of resurrecting themselves through bloodlines. This child, wherever it was, represented not just Luna's vengeance, but the one thing Bill could never control: inheritance. Katie was the one who tried to be rational. She reminded them that it might not even be true, that DNA could settle everything. Yet deep down, even she felt the chill of inevitability. There was too much precision in the letter, too much care in its timing. Someone had wanted them to find out now, when the family was most fractured. Someone who understood that truth was the most effective form of destruction. Days turned into weeks, and the investigation began. Spencer Publications quietly hired private investigators under the guise of a new, humanitarian initiative. They traced Luna's last known movements, her medical history, her financial transfers. What they uncovered was disturbing. 2 months before her death, Luna had visited a discreet fertility clinic in San Francisco known for handling celebrity surrogacies and confidential adoptions. She had made a large payment to the clinic and listed an emergency contact under an alias, Elena Sato. That name appeared again on the birth certificate. It was Katie who found the connection. Elena Sato was Luna's college roommate, a woman who had vanished from public life years ago. When the investigators finally located her in Northern California, she refused to speak to anyone except Will. Against his father's warnings, Will went. He found her living in a quiet seaside house surrounded by wild lavender and the sound of waves, the same sound that had once swallowed Luna. Elena looked older, frail, but her eyes carried a secret that had burned too long. "He's safe," she told Will before he could even ask. Luna wanted it that way. She knew she wouldn't survive the crash. The words hit him like a blow. "You're saying she planned her own death?" Elena nodded slowly. "Not in the way you think." She knew she was being followed. She knew there were people who wanted her gone, people who couldn't risk what she knew about the deals your family made. She didn't want the baby to grow up in that world. Will sat there in silence, the sound of the ocean crashing in rhythm with his heartbeat. "Where is he?" he whispered. Elena hesitated, then handed him a small photograph. The image showed a baby, dark hair, pale eyes, a faint smile that mirrored Luna's own. "His name is Kai," she said softly. "He's yours." The journey back to Los Angeles felt unreal. The city looked the same, glittering and indifferent, but everything inside Will had changed. When he showed the photograph to Electra, she broke down. Not from anger, but from the realization that Luna's presence had returned to haunt them both. "This will destroy us," she said. But Will couldn't bring himself to care about destruction. For the first time, he felt something stronger than guilt. He felt responsibility. Bill's reaction was predictable, cold fury. "We can't let this out," he said. "Not yet. If the world finds out Luna had your child, we'll be dragged through another scandal. We'll lose investors' influence." "He's not a scandal," Will interrupted sharply. "He's a child." The two men stood at opposite ends of the office, the city skyline between them like a wall. Bill had built an empire out of control, Will was realizing, painfully, that control and compassion could not coexist. Meanwhile, Electra withdrew into herself. The woman who had once prided herself on grace now found it impossible to maintain. Everywhere she looked, Luna lingered. In the fashion archives, in the photographs, in Will's eyes. Every conversation turned back to her. Electra began to feel invisible, her existence eclipsed by a ghost. Yet part of her pitied the child. She knew what it was like to grow up in the shadow of scandal. She had promised herself she would never repeat that cycle. Then the press found out. No one knew how, perhaps an insider at the clinic, perhaps a leak from the investigation, but within days, the headlines exploded. Luna Nozawa's secret child discovered. Heir to Spencer fortune? The story consumed every network, every screen. Protesters gathered outside Spencer Tower demanding answers about corporate hypocrisy and hidden heirs. Investors panicked. Competitors smelled blood. Bill went into lockdown mode, issuing legal threats, silencing tabloids, but the damage was already done. Katie tried to reach him, reminding him that shielding the truth had always cost them more than revealing it. But Bill was beyond reason. "This isn't about truth," he said. "It's about control." And that child is the one thing Luna left behind that can still take everything from us. Will refused to accept that logic. He contacted Elena again, demanding to see the boy. Against her better judgment, she agreed, on one condition. The meeting would stay secret. He met them in a park north of the city, far from cameras and curiosity. When he saw Kai for the first time, something in him broke open. The child had Luna's eyes, but his quietness, his calm. Kai looked up at him with unguarded curiosity, unaware of the weight of the world pressing down on that moment. Does he know? Will asked softly. Elena shook her head. He knows only that his mother loved him enough to let him go. The weeks that followed were a blur of chaos. Bill's lawyers fought to claim custody, arguing that the Spencer family had a legal obligation to provide for the child. The public saw it as another battle of wealth and image. But privately, it was far more personal. Will wanted to raise Kai himself, to honor Luna's memory. Electra, though hurt, stood beside him at first, believing love meant sacrifice. Yet the more the world talked about Luna, the less Electra could breathe. Every photo, every interview, every whisper of the child of Luna pushed her further toward resentment. Katie tried to bridge the fractures forming across the family, but even she could feel the tremor of something irreversible. He's just a child, she reminded them again and again. But no one listened. The Spencers had never known how to love without turning it into a power struggle. Then came the second revelation, one that changed everything again. A journalist released hospital footage showing that Luna had survived for several hours after the crash. During that time, she had made a final video message addressed to the father of my child. In the video, Luna appeared bruised but lucid, her voice steady. If you're seeing this, she said, it means I didn't make it. I don't regret what we had, Will. But I won't let my child grow up surrounded by lies. Protect him if you can. And if you can't, don't look for him. Let him be free. The message shattered what little peace remained. Bill saw it as a threat to their reputation. Will saw it as a commandment. He made the decision that night. He would fight for custody, not as a Spencer, but as a father. If she trusted me to protect him, he said, then I won't let anyone use him, not even us. The court battle that followed was one of the most brutal in the city's recent memory. Lawyers dissected Luna's life, her death, her choices, until she was reduced to a series of exhibits. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, spinning every argument into entertainment. Through it all, Kai remained silent, a symbol of innocence surrounded by greed and guilt. Electra broke first. She left Will without a word, moving back to Europe to escape the endless scrutiny. Katie withdrew from the press entirely, focusing on protecting her own son from the chaos. Bill, cornered by both the media and his conscience, finally relented. He dropped the case, claiming he wanted what's best for the boy, though everyone knew the empire had begun to rot under the weight of its secrets. When the dust settled, Will found himself standing alone outside the courthouse, the child's small hand clutching his. Reporters shouted questions. Is he really yours? Will you tell him about Luna? But Will ignored them. The answer was too complex for words. Months passed. Life, in its strange resilience, continued. Kai grew, his laughter slowly filling the empty rooms of the Spencer estate. Will found a fragile peace in fatherhood, though guilt still shadowed every joy. At night, when the city quieted, he would sit by the window, watching the same moon Luna had once loved. He would tell Kai stories about her, not the tragic headlines, but the real woman, fierce, brilliant, reckless, alive. Yet even peace has its price. One evening, a letter arrived with no name, only a seal, Luna's crest from her private collection. Inside was a single line written in her handwriting. He was never yours alone. The meaning was unclear, whether it referred to love, legacy, or lineage, but it reopened every question that Will had tried to bury. Somewhere out there, another truth waited, another secret entwined with Luna's ghost. And as the lights of Los Angeles flickered in the distance, the Spencer family realized that Luna's story had never really ended. It had merely changed form, living now in the small boy whose laughter carried both her fire and her mystery, a living testament to love, guilt, and the price of silence. In that city built on reinvention, where every legacy was both blessing and curse, Luna's shadow stretched long over them all, reminding the Spencers that some inheritances are not of wealth or power, but of consequence. And that even after death, some loves refuse to let go.